Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us live this morning on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. All right, today we're going to talk about a topic that I feel very, very passionate about. We're going to talk about data storytelling. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how we can leverage data storytelling to increase data adoption and to create a better data culture within an organization. I'll be joined with Dr. Nate Nichols, who's the Chief Scientist at Narrative Science, and Cassidy Shield, the VP of Marketing at Narrative Science. I'm going to go ahead and bring them up on the virtual stage in just a minute, because as you're joining, I want to know where you're tuning in from. That's always interesting to see kind of where people are tuning in from. But we also have a fun question for you, and we really can't wait to hear the results of this. Basically, on a scale of 1 to 10, let us know how important do you think data storytelling is? Okay, so 1 being not important at all, 5 is average, and 10 is extremely important. So if you're joining us right now, please go ahead and answer that question. And speaking of questions, we will take questions and comments. We'll address those throughout the session. We're not waiting until the end of the talk to actually take questions, so feel free to ask things as they come up. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and bring up Dr. Nate Nichols and Cassidy Shield here. Hello, welcome to the Dedicated Show.
Hey, Kate. Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Kate, everybody. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. And as more people are joining, I'll just restate my question quickly. We're asking you to rate the level of importance of data storytelling from 1 to 10. 1, not important at all, and 10, extremely important. And as those responses are coming in, let's do some introductions. So Dr. Nate Nichols, let's start with you and let people know a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in narrative science.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming in, tuning in this morning. My name is Nate Nichols. I'm Chief Scientist in Narrative Science. I've been at NS for almost 11 years now, which is pretty crazy. My whole career has been here. I started as an engineer and built a lot of our core technology right after I got my PhD at Northwestern from the AI lab there that Narrative Science actually spun out of. And originally I was going to be a professor after graduating, and then I started working at NS for the summer, and it was clearly too much fun to sort of have that opportunity pass by without me being part of it. So I switched careers. I started at NS, built a lot of our core technology before shifting to the product side. And now in the chief scientist role, I'm accountable for the strategic value of our technology and of our viewpoint on AI and automated data storytelling in particular. And I also have a side sort of interest in storytelling broadly. I run something called the Storytelling Workshop at Narrative Science. Cassidy is a proud member of the current class of that. We're doing it all remotely now, but that's a program where we bring employees through to help them become better storytellers, both personally and professionally. And I also wrote a book on storytelling with my friend and coworker, Anna Walsh, who I think I saw in the comments. We wrote a book called Let Your People Be People. You can come check it out. It's a free book, but it's all around how to use data storytelling to improve your organization and ultimately let your people be more themselves.
Awesome. Wow. 11 years. I actually didn't know that. That's really cool. So 2 quick follow-up questions. 1, that storytelling workshop, is that for employees of Narrative Science only, or can other people go ahead and check
that out?
Yes,
you got to be an employee at Narrative Science to participate. We are hiring, so if you're really interested in the storytelling workshop, come to work at Narrative Science, and we would love to have you as part of that. But yeah, for now, it's one of our recruiting perks we offer people.
Perfect. And you mentioned the free book. Where can people find that book? So maybe if somebody is on from Narrative Science, if they can share a link, or is there an easy way to find it?
Yeah, that would be great if somebody's there. But if you Google "Let Your People Be People" or come to the Narrative Science site, it's available as a PDF, and I think it's on Amazon now as well. It's a nice short. Okay. It's very concrete, trying to genuinely be helpful to people. So I think you might want to check it out.
Okay, awesome. All right, Mr. Shield, let's hear from you. How did you end up at Narrative Science, and share your story with us?
Yeah, first I want to say, I'm part of Nate's storytelling workshop. So after this event, I get to go to our workshop and present there, which is a lot more pressure than this. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Cassidy Shield. I run marketing for Narrative Science. I've been here 2.5 years. I also lead our podcast, Leading with Data. So make sure to check that out. Prior to neuroscience, I spent 25 years in a variety of different functions. I've not always been a marketer. I've also been in product development. I've also been in supply chain. And the common thread through each of those roles has been my passion around data and analytics and creating a team and an organization that's data driven. And that's what brought me to narrative science. I'd be sitting there one day in my office, and I knew there had to be a better way to enable my team and the company to easily understand data. When I came across narrative science, I was like, this is it. A future where machines, converse with humans and humans converse with machines about data. I thought that was inevitable. It will happen at some point in time. And joining narrative science to see if we can make that happen was really the reason I came here, the mission of the company. So I look forward to this conversation and delving a little bit more into this topic. It's something we're all passionate about.
Great. Well, very excited to have both of you here. I'm going to quickly look at some of the comments we received in terms of rating the importance of data storytelling. So we've got an 11 out of 10.
Nice.
Good. We have a 10, a 9, a 10, a 9, 11. I haven't seen anything less than a 9 at this point. So Zachary says, data and analysis is pointless if it can't be communicated. I really do refer to it as that last mile of data analytics, right? If you can't deliver it, if you can't get it across that last mile, you have not run the full marathon, right? There's no point. So you're just running for no reason. You don't get the medal, you don't get the reward. So for the most part, I think we're speaking to the right crowd here. They believe in the importance of data storytelling. Now, before I get into any further questions and into our discussion, I think it's important to define data storytelling. So let's start with that. What really is data storytelling?
Yeah, so when I think of data storytelling, it's the sort of easiest thing is when you're looking at a dashboard with an analyst or somebody who knows, and you say, hey, tell me what I'm seeing here, or take me through these numbers, right? Those kind of things we say that are code for, I don't really understand what this is. Can you explain it to me? And the thing they come back with, that's the data story, right? That's what they're doing is data storytelling. And that's the kind of informal definition. There is a more formal definition that Brent Dykes came up with, and he wrote a great book called Effective Data Storytelling. This is the definition that Gartner uses, and there's 3 parts to a data story. The first is Viz, which is the part we all know and love with charts and graphs, dashboard kind of stuff. There's the narrative, which is the actual story. It's a written out description of, hey, some new product line launched and it's doing really well, and that's helping to drive up revenue. And but we were sort of supply constrained, and so it didn't go up as high as it could have. That's the narrative piece of a data story. And then there's extra data, just context, right? And really extra data context, stuff that's not in the data. Hey, this team was on vacation. They just had a bunch of training, which has helped drive up this number. There's a boat lodged in the Suez Canal, and so shipping everywhere is delayed. It's that kind of context. It's not really in the data. And so those 3 pieces, the viz, the narrative, and the context, are the sort of more technical definition of what goes into a data story. And I personally like that definition. And the only thing I sort of don't like about it is that it makes it sound like it makes data storytelling sound like a very explicit, intentional process, right? You think I'm gonna write a data story now, and I'm doing data storytelling. Look at me, and that's true, and that does happen externally, but it's also happening internally all the time in our brains, right? Humans are not evolved to look at a line chart or to look at a dashboard, and that just goes into your brain, right? That's not. No matter how smart you are, how quantitative you are, how big your brain is, you don't just consume line charts, right? That's not how we're evolved. Instead, we consume stories. This is how we understand the world. This is why we invented, Zeus and all those guys to explain thunder and lightning. Humans think in stories, and so for anything to stick in our brain, it has to be for any data to stick in our brain, it has to be in a story form, right? Stories are how we understand, and data storytelling is how we consume data and insights. And so what happens a lot of the time is that data storytelling just happens internally in our own brains, right? Mm-hmm. We look at a chart, we think, oh, that's going up, that's pretty good. Oh, but I saw a thing go by in Slack. That's the context we're talking about. Maybe sort of some understanding of why it's doing that. That's the narrative. So we do this all informally all the time. And I know we talk about it a lot now. We have podcasts and LinkedIn Live conversations about it, but it's not a new thing that you can decide to do or not. It's a thing that we all do internally all the time, and you can decide how explicitly and how sort of seriously you want to take that. That's data storytelling for me.
So you're saying Zeus is not real? That's what I'm getting.
I don't want to offend anyone in the audience. I don't know if there's any ancient Greeks here, but yes, it's generally understood that Zeus is not an actual person. That's a good point. I mean, data stories don't have to be accurate. There can be really bad. There can be really bad, really shallow, really sort of inaccurate data stories. And then obviously the good ones are the ones that are meaningful and true and help people make decisions and take actions in the future.
Yeah, I think one thing definitely resonated is more so than the rest is when you said that data stories are in our heads. And it's so true, because no matter how hard we try to either listen to a presentation or take in information, we already have some sort of other context that we're consuming this with. And that just makes it difficult for the storyteller sometimes to convey their message. And I know we're going to get into some tips and how companies like Narrative Science and your tool Lexio can actually address some of that. But first, I want to touch on the fact that companies have all this data, right? They collect so much data. And I know there are so many statistics, like every day there's more data than collected today than, in the past 10 years or something like that. That's not an accurate statistic. But anyways, companies have a lot of data, and they build dashboards and they build data visualizations to try and pull insights from that data. How can data storytelling help bridge the gap from collecting that data to actually communicating the key insights to those that need to hear them in a timely fashion?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to get comfortable with is that the only way people understand and act on data is through stories. And so they may be doing that themselves. They may be told the story. But when you start understanding that, you admit to yourself that in order to get the data that we have as a company into the hands of the people who need it, they need to be able to understand that. And the way they understand that is they're going to tell themselves a story about what this means to them, to their team, to their organization. So what we noticed is there's really two ways this happens today. One is what's called do it yourself, which is, we train people. We'll call that data literacy. It's kind of the hot topic, but we train people like myself or my team to understand data, which is not understanding is going into a tool and be able to figure out the tool, but understanding what is important for your function or your organization, what metrics drive that, what drivers of those metrics do you need to know, what are then the actions you take to influence that. So the ability to train people to do that is one way to do that. And that's a long process and something that's necessary. The other way to do this is hire a bunch of analysts to help the team do it for them, right? And so, this is something we all feel. We know there's not enough analysts out there to support an organization when it comes to effectively telling stories and getting data in the hands of others. But those are the two ways that happens today. So it's either do it yourself and get trained, or hire a bunch of analysts and train them to train, the business user on how to do it. And that's why we exist. We felt like the issue that we saw in the market is that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of resources, it's expensive, and it doesn't scale. So we asked ourselves, listen, could we scale this and augment this experience through technology? And that's really why the company was formed.
So can we? Let's talk about narrative science. Let's talk about Lexio. How do we avoid having to spend all the time and resources in either training up people on becoming more data literate or hiring a bunch of analysts to do that job for us?
Yeah, so we think you can, to answer the question. And so we built a product that is automated data storytelling. And so what it does is we approached the market and said, this is how BI works today.
Mm-hmm.
It's adopted by, let's call it 30% of the population in an organization. How do we build something different for the other 70%? And we knew that had to be simple. It had to be personal. It had to be proactive. It had to be the data comes to them. It comes to them in a form of stories. It has context about their function and their role in them and what they need to know. And that's what we do as a company. That's what we do at Lexio. And so really what we see this as is a way to scale the analyst function and scale data storytelling to put in the hands of more people in an organization the data they need to do their job. So it's a journey we're on. It's a journey the entire industry is on. We feel like we have one way to do it. It's pretty good. We can get into that later. But we believe you can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely looking forward to watching the demo. For those who are tuned in live with us right now, we will have a demo from Cassidy shortly. But first, I want to take a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. Actually, first, I'll start with a comment from Ron. He says that leaving data interpretation up to the end user often creates confusion and erroneous analysis. So very true. I have seen this so many times because for two parts. One, the person creating the visualization or dashboard or whatever that might be, they have all this context, all this knowledge that they're presenting this information with that knowledge in their head. And then there comes this brand new person, some executive, they're like, what? What is this? And then they try to make sense of it. So definitely there's definitely a gap that needs to be closed there. And a question that came in on the topic from Rodi, she says she recently had a light bulb moment. Data storytelling done by journalists is not necessarily the presentation of sound data science or analytics. Therefore, it might be quite misleading, like the data validation, causation, correlation. How much due diligence do you think a data storyteller is responsible for doing?
I'll take that one, Cassie. I think they have a lot. There's a lot of responsibility there, just because, like Cassidy was just saying. I think you were saying, Kate, data storytelling is how you actually influence people with data, right? And so it's one thing if you're throwing up a chart that no one is going to look at or really take anything away from, and the chart is wrong. It's kind of like, well, the chart should have been better. It should have been more accurate, but there's no effect of it. But as you start doing data storytelling, and there's an actual, you're moving people in some way, all of a sudden the importance of of getting that right, it becomes more important. And so you can do that and sort of taking responsibility for the numbers, and you can do that through your expertise. You have strong data background, strong quantitative background. You sort of know your business there. That's one way to do it. You can rely on sort of AI or things that you trust, like Lexio or other places where our math is definitely going to be right. We can sort of tell you what the system did. It's a very repeatable, inspectable process. Mm-hmm. That's another way to get some of that transparency. But yeah, as you start sort of dealing with things that can impact the real world and really cause people to make changes, I think there's an onus for getting that right, or getting that as right as possible, and being really clear about what you sort of did to arrive at that, right? And that's another kind of nice part about data storytelling, is you can explain, because you're including more of the why. There's more causation. It's sort of easier for people to look at that and identify places where your reasoning may be soft, or you're confusing correlation and causation, because it's more apparent to them. It's easier for people to kind of find weaknesses in it than if it were just a bunch of line charts, and it's like, well, where did this data come from? Well, it came out of a database. Okay, well, where did that data come from? You have to sort of keep pulling at it in a more sort of traditional data presentation mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to touch on something that we kind of mentioned earlier about the adoption rates, right? So I think it is, we can all agree that the adoption rate for, let's say, dashboards or data visualizations or things built with data for people to make decisions with have a pretty low or lower than desired adoption rate. So I wanted to first talk about why you guys think that is, and then maybe touch on how Lexio from Narrative Science can help increase that adoption rate.
Well, I mean, I think the first person who made the comment that you pulled up hit the nail on the head, and that is today with current technology, it leaves too much room for interpretation. And so obviously the analyst puts a lot of time into building this dashboard, and then for us who read it, we're all interpreting it differently. Or we're not interpreting it at all because we don't understand. So over time, what happens is we then just stop looking at the dashboard and we go on and make business decisions without being informed.
Yeah.
I think another reason, though, that we haven't hit on is one of culture too, right? So one way to fix this is to build this into your culture, meaning that we are going to make decisions that are data-driven as an organization. And when I think of culture, there's a fabulous book out there that's What We Do Is Who We Are. And I think when it comes to data culture, like that is a perfect way to sum this up. And that is, if you want to drive adoption in your organization, yes, you need to train users, you need to have the right technology, but you have to have a data-driven culture, and that starts top down. That starts with people like me making this an expectation of my organization, It starts with the leadership of the company, making it an expectation of the entire company. And so I think one of the things that we have a data adoption issue is because this is a nice to have in most organizations. It's not being mandated top down. The company's not making business decisions that are data driven all the time. It's done in pockets. And so when that happens, people aren't going to put in the effort. They're not going to put in the effort to learn it themselves. And the analysts aren't going to put in the effort to go the extra mile to make sure people are informed, because they ask themselves, what's the use if we're not making decisions based on data?
Yes, and I've seen this so many times, this whole culture topic. I feel like it's so complicated because you'll have, especially in a bigger organization, right? You'll have different personalities you're working with. You have some people that still want a piece of paper in a meeting versus a dashboard that the analysts clearly have invested so much time in designing or putting stuff together and analyzing or trying to tell that data story. So how do we, and I guess it's a gradual thing, but how do we actually move towards a stronger, more data-driven culture?
Well, for me, I think a lot of it is around like Cassidy was saying, the going from top to bottom. And I think there's also the dimension of like regularity is also super important, where there's a lot of like monthly status updates, or here's the quarterly deck that, maybe gets shared out with the company. And that's cool. That's like better than not doing data at all. But it's, like you mentioned, I know you're a big runner, Kate. You can't say I'm a big runner. I run at the end of every quarter. I run 10 miles. That's not, you don't get to self-identify as a runner like that, right? And I think it's the same thing with data. If you really want to be a data-driven culture, because we all want to, and every organization we've talked to has spent the money, and it has felt like they've sort of bought the right to be a data-driven culture with all these huge investments they've made. But then they don't sort of do the work to have that be a week-to-week or a day-to-day thing. It becomes these big sort of data dumps that are hard to sort of wrap your heads around, and it's not enough to course correct. And you do, doing annual planning or doing sort of new updated quarterly projections, that's super useful, and we should take advantage of those sort of natural milestones. But there's just minor course corrections and updates and sort of situational awareness we want, throughout the week, throughout the month, and sort of helping people get that. And it's not, I was listening to a sales call we had recently, and the analyst on the other end was like, this isn't rocket science. It's like, yeah, a lot of this stuff it's not rocket science, right? We don't need these big models delivered, 4 times a day, but knowing when you close deals, knowing when all of a sudden your chance of hitting your goal slips below 50%, or knowing when some big thing has moved, that's really valuable to know at 2:00 on a Tuesday. And I think there are a few organizations that have that sort of regular cadence, and that I think it's necessary to really keep the awareness of data and understanding of data in the air that it needs to be to really be part of the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I find interesting is I think this is part responsibility of all of us in an organization. We don't show up at work and ask where our computer is. We don't show up at work and say, why are you not training me to be better in my function? I mean, we need to show up at work and be like, I demand the data I need to do my job. I mean, we're hiring people. We expect them to be data driven. We expect them to make decisions to run the business. We're democratizing decision making more and more throughout an organization. Everybody is. People need the tools to do their job effectively, and those tools are the data they need to understand how they're performing and what they need to do to change and drive the decisions that they're going to make. And we, as leaders on the front lines, need to be saying, we demand that our team has the data to be able to do their job effectively for us to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think trust plays a big role in driving that culture forward, because the more people can see that they can trust what's being put in front of them, that new format, right, that they might not have been used to seeing because they love doing things the way they always used to do. Definitely dealt with those where I'm like, but see, this is what you used to use, and this is the same thing, and matches. And then they're like, oh, okay. It's easier to kind of sway them over. Checking in on some of the questions that are coming in. So Lucas has a question here. He says, how do you balance leaving the message you want to communicate clearly and not stripping information that could lead to other conclusions?
Yeah, well, I think in general, I love that you say that there's a message you want to communicate, because I think lots of times that there's this sort of idea when I talk to particular sort of like junior analysts, where it's their job to do the numbers and their job to present those to people that are business folks or sort of know more than them or are more business comfortable with them, and they're going to draw the right conclusions from that. And I really see that sort of as an abdication of the analyst role, right? They have to have, it's the analyst's job to communicate some kind of takeaways, right? They have to be, in my view, they should be building data stories. It has that narrative thing. It's not just descriptive. It's also making recommendations. It's sort of, talking about what drove a thing. It's an opinionated piece of that. And so I think it is really important to have the message. And I think it's, when I sort of think back to different communications or sort of reports or pieces of analysis I've read, here's the sort of top line recommendation. Here's the top line from takeaway from the analyst's point of view. Here are other things that are less well supported by the data, and including those in there, and sort of having those available as threads that people can pull. And hey, there's more we can dig into. If something doesn't smell right about my conclusion, here's other options we can look at. I think that's a great mode to sort of have those kind of not backup options, but other like possible messages or takeaways. But I love the emphasis on coming up with having an opinion and sort of putting yourself out there. I think it's often kind of a nerves thing where they don't want to, if all I do is present data, then nobody can be mad at me or tell me I screwed up, because I'm just doing what the numbers say. And I really encourage everyone listening in to go farther than that and to try to have that message.
Yeah. Typically, the question that gets asked when you see analysis is what drove that. So when I think about what do you strip out the things that aren't relevant to like what drove that result. And so that's the way I would think about this in terms of communication. There's a lot of data that goes into an analysis. What the person wants to know is what drove it, and then they want to know what should I do about it. So when you think about communicating, I would focus on that. Can you answer that question for the person you're communicating to?
Yes, and I also think whenever we're presenting a data story, a lot of times it's helpful to think through first of all who your audience is and what are the maybe 2 to 3 questions they'll have as soon as they see that visual, right? Because clearly you're telling them something, and they'll ask, well, why is this something bigger than the other something? And then your next story could be, well, this is, and I think it's so easy a lot of times to predict it if you've taken at least a few minutes to think about what do they care about and what are they going to ask, so you can be a lot more prepared for that data storytelling. And one point that I feel like a lot of maybe data analysts, data scientists struggle with data storytelling is they get caught up into telling the story of the data, meaning, so I went to this data source and I connected it with this other data source and it lagged for like an hour. And then we connected it, joined on this field, So what's the right way to tell a data story, let's say to a business executive? What would you start with? And you can use an actual example if you'd like, or just make something up.
You're a business executive, Cassidy. What do you look for in a data story?
I love that you brought up that example. Like, what I don't need to hear is how you put the data together. As impressive as that might be a conversation we can have over coffee, but not when we're sitting in a room talking about the business. First and foremost, it's important for the analyst to understand what drives our business, or what drives that function. So as a marketer, what do I care about? What are the metrics I'm using to drive the function, the team, et cetera, and how do those impact the top line? And once you know that, then what you need to help me do is figure out, like, what are the things that we're doing that drive that, or that we're not doing that we should be doing to drive that. This puts a ton of pressure on the analyst, because the analyst doesn't not only need to understand data and how to get it together into a dashboard or a tool, they also need to understand my business. And so that's a tough spot to be in, but that's the requirement if you're going into an executive meeting and you need to explain what the numbers mean to the business. Short and concise, obviously. So what are the things that are statistically significant? What are the things that we don't know in the data that we would like to know? So those would be the risks that you would call out and say, these are the things that the analysis doesn't tell us that we should look at, things we need to analyze more. But I think you hit the nail on the head early, Kate, and that is you got to understand your audience. For someone like me, I'll be happy to dig into it a little bit more. Somebody like my boss, you need to give it to them at a different level. And so this is the human side of this that everybody needs to figure out, whether you're the marketing leader or the marketing analyst is, what level do you need to communicate to a particular person?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
A thing I try to keep in mind is that it's like a well understood thing, but it's what's in it for me, and trying to like put yourself in. I was just thinking, I was thinking of Stuart, Cassidy's boss too, and it's like what's in it for Stuart? He's our CEO. What's in it for Stuart? And like, if you're going through and talking about how long the data load took, or how hard you had to work to clean the data, there's like nothing. He can't do anything with it. I mean, he can appreciate that in like employees are working hard level, but there's nothing he can't he can't like wrap his arms around that at all, right? And so it's same, it's kind of easy to think about that when it's the CEO and we're trying. It's like, oh, it's the CEO, but it's the same thing for someone on the sales team. I don't talk to them about here's the nitty gritty of our architecture and here's how it works. It's I want them to understand how Lexio works at a high level. But I have to give it to them in a way that they can wrap their arms around it, where there's something in it for them, and this is how you can help close deals with that, or this is how you can have this kind of conversation. So I think just trying to have that mindset of, when you're communicating, it's for the benefit of your audience, right? Not for you. This is not a performance review where you talk about how hard you work. It's really for the audience. And so trying to be really cognizant of what's in it for them has been a thing that I've been using effectively for the last few years. It took me a while to learn it, but I'm there now.
Yeah, I think the thing I tend to keep in mind for this question is, whenever you go to a doctor or a dentist or something along those lines, they never say, okay, so we ran your blood work and we did this exact test, and then we did it 5 times because the machine kept breaking and it lagged.
Oh man, it was the whole thing.
Like, am I dying or not? Right? Like, just tell me what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
All that. Like, so I definitely draw some similarities there. We've got a couple more questions that just came in. So Ron is asking here specifically about Lexio. So are the stories presented in Lexio created by AI, or are they stored and then presented when certain thresholds are met?
Yeah, I love Lexio. Questions about Lexio and AI, Ron, thanks for that. Yeah, they're all totally generated by an AI, and we, if you want to catch up later, I'm happy to go deep with you on how that works. But in general, there's sort of 2 modes Lexio is working in. One is for the news feed, and what we call the notable insights, where every time we pull in data every few hours, Lexio is doing a bunch of analysis against that data, looking for notable things that have happened, and when it finds them, writing a story about that and pushing that to people's, to their phones, to their desktops, wherever they are. And those stories are all written by AI, and as well as you can also, you'll see this with Cassidy demos, that you can just intentionally explore deeper and say, I want to track this metric at this time frame, and then Lexio writes that story again for you right then. It's all totally driven by AI. There's a lot of information and sort of models we built into Lexio, so it knows a lot about BI and the types of questions people ask and things in the world that they probably want to do analysis over, and how to communicate all that in plain English. And that's, a lot of the IP and technology we've built is in that space. And so once you get your data wired in and give us the few little bits we need, Lexio is happy to write you data stories all day long.
Wow, awesome. So I think it's a good point. Good time for us to switch over and maybe talk about some common use cases for Lexio, and then look at the demo, Cassidy. Whenever you're ready to show that, just let me know. I'll share your screen.
Okay. Yeah, use cases are interesting. We've seen 2 real themes come out in our customers and the prospects we talk to. One is the clear use case of the analyst saying, I need to replicate myself. I have too many questions. I have too much demand. Can this replicate what I do? Can this give me a superpower, as Nate would say, and scale my team using technology? So that's one. It comes from the analysts for the analytics team saying they recognize the problem first and they want to do something about that. They know they're not going to hire 10, 50 more people. Is there a way to scale it? The other we're seeing is coming from an executive down, which is saying, this isn't working for my company. This is what I want. And which is really interesting. You don't see a lot of BI or analytics tools being bought by C-suite. And we've seen a lot of that come in where they're like, listen, I'm trying to empower my team and my organization. The way we're doing it is not working. This resonates more with me, executive level reporting, et cetera. So let's start there and kind of work our way out to the organization. So these are kind of 2 distinct use cases that are coming in: executive reporting, starting at the top, working down to the front lines. or the analyst function saying, what I'm doing today works in pockets, but I need to scale that. I need a more efficient way.
Yeah, I've definitely been in the boat where I was the analyst. And once people see something, once they get a taste of some sort of data, right, that they've never seen before, maybe, or they've seen in disparate spreadsheets, but now they can see it all together, then all the other departments are like, oh, I want that. Now I want that now. And yeah, you can't just get 10 or 20 more people. So I'm glad that there is a solution. And I guess you're about to show us now, right?
Yeah, I can pop it up and walk everybody through it.
Awesome. I'm excited. I love demos. So
let me, if I do this, does that mess things up?
I still see your screen. And by the way, for those listening, feel free to jump in with questions and comments throughout the demo. We'll take questions.
We're trying to, hold on a second.
You took your screen away, Cassidy.
I know, let me try this again.
It's okay. We'll just look at your artwork for now behind you. So, I heard you had a couple of new images added to your background.
Did, yeah. There we go. I was looking at I need to be able to get to Lexio. That was my fault. Yeah, I do. I have. It was my wife's birthday, so we added some more art to the wall.
Perfect.
So, can you see this, Kate?
Yep, we can see it, and I can see you moving it, so it's all good.
All right, great. So there's 3 words I want everybody to keep in mind as I go through this: simple, personal, and proactive. I mentioned this earlier. What we've done with Lexio is we tried to reimagine an analytics experience specific to the business user. So if you think about the problem we're trying to solve, which we've been talking about on this call, there's a place and time where today's BI tools, dashboards work really well. But for the vast majority of an organization, they don't. And so what we wanted to do is not design a better dashboard, but a different experience for those who aren't using dashboards. And this is what you see with Lexio. So the paradigm or the inspiration of this is, can we do with business data what we do in our personal lives when we consume information? And so what you're looking at here is this thing called the news feed, and I'll walk through the components of it in a minute. But what we're trying to do is say, in our personal lives, we're on Apple News, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on the New York Times. This is how we consume information in our personal lives. Why can we not consume information in our professional lives the same way? And so that was the spirit behind the newsfeed. And so let me walk you through a few of the components. What you see right away at the top is this thing called pin metrics. So I'm a marketer. These may be the metrics that I would want to pin. These are the metrics that are driving my function or my responsibility. I'm looking, as you see here, at revenue or bookings per month, at pipeline, and at leads. And what Lexio is doing is a few things. It's saying, how am I tracking to the goal? And what is driving that performance? And you can see that here in the paragraph. So this is Lexio's AI at work that Nate talked about, saying, your revenue is up, and these are the reasons it's up. It's up because of this rep. It's up in the city of Atlanta. It's driven by this lead source, et cetera. So pretty simple. This is what's I need to know to manage my function day in and day out. Lexio is telling me what I need to know. The key here is this is unique to each individual. So the metrics that I pin would be different than the metrics that you pin, Kate. That would be different than the metrics that Nate would pin. And so this is basically me telling Lexio in one way, what do I care about? The other way you tell Lexio what you care about is you follow topics. And this is very similar to what you would do on Apple News. You're following certain things that you're interested in. So over here, there are other topics that you can just follow and set up notifications for. So I want to know about sales performance, customer support, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm telling Lexio, these are the things I care about that are important to me, that I would like to get more information and more insight on. So once you've done this can be set up by the end user or the analyst. Lexio starts telling you things that the tool thinks that you need to know. And Nate mentioned this, those are notable insights. These are meaningful trends in your business. So what are the things that are happening day in and day out in your data that you may want to take a deeper look at? So leads are up, support tickets are up, pipeline's higher than usual. You get the idea. Mm-hmm. Lexio using AI to say, these are the things that we think you need to look at because they may be notable and impactful to your business. And then last, what you see in the newsfeed is just, we sometimes want to know what's happening day in and day out. So what happened yesterday in ad performance? What happened yesterday in leads? Did we book any deals? Did deals change transitions? Did we ship product? Like, this is what Lexio is doing down here, is you can set this up and say, these are the other things that I'm interested in knowing happened in my data every day.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a news feed. Now, you could go to this page and you can look at it. You can go on your phone and look at it, so there's an app. You can set up alerts and notifications to bring it to you. And so what we're working on is when I say bring it to you, today you can get this in your email, a summary.
Mm-hmm.
Soon you'll be able to get it in Slack, in Teams, as alerts on your phone, in another application. So if you're in Salesforce, we can put it there. And the point here is we want to bring this to where your users are. If your users are communicating in Slack, we're going to bring the insight to them. If your users are on the go, like a lot of executives, we're going to bring it to them on their phone, and so forth and so on. So the idea here is you tell Lexio a little bit about what you want to know. Lexio back what you need to know. So that is where the majority of people spend their time. But let's say you also want to look a little deeper, and I'll go through this in 1 minute. You can. So this is kind of analogous to what you would do with a dashboard. It just has more context. So what I'm pulling up here is you can go through and look at a deeper story on bookings. You can see how many deals drove it. So this starts to look familiar to other people. You can look at what drove this. We talked about drivers. These are the drivers that drove the business. I can click this and see other drivers. I can see how it's trending over time. So this, to Nate's point, is all AI driven. You didn't have to set this up. You didn't have to build this as an analyst. What Lexio does is if you're looking at this story, it then understands what other stories you'll want to look at. So you have this thing called what to read next. And it helps you kind of intelligently discover data. So you can go through, you get the idea. I can break it down further. It creates another story for me.
Wow.
So
this is really cool.
Breaking down, you get the idea. And so what we're trying to do here is create an experience that's easy and intuitive. So like I said before, simple, personalized to each person, proactive, meaning Lexio brings the insight to you. What the analyst does, obviously, is spends time getting data from their warehouse or their transactional systems into Lexio. The analyst gets to spend time understanding what are the metrics that are important in the drivers for their organizations. There's obviously tools here where you can configure thresholds and permissions and so forth and so on. But what they're not doing is spending their time building dashboard after dashboard. And this is kind of our vision of how you scale insight to everybody in the company in a way that's easy to consume.
Amazing. Thank you so much for walking through this. I'll just keep your screen up for a second, but you removed it. That's okay. I just had a few questions. So first of all, I love it. It looks very simple, and it reminds me of something that in the prior role, we were working on a weekly email that would say something along the lines of, okay, here are the top industries that we made sales in. Here are the top 3 clients, and this went up by 10% over the last week. But I'm telling you, to put that email together, it took a full day and a full team of people. And it still would not be accurate because it involved so many moving pieces and people and data sources. And again, I'm being that person who's not supposed to be talking about the data, but I am, because I can see this very easily and quickly replacing something that is a very automated kind of weekly email that should be simple, but was definitely far from simple. Now, first, the easy question. When you were showing the notable notifications, or was it notable insights, there was a thumbs up. Is that because it was a good insight, or do you click that thumbs up if you like the insight? What was that all about?
Yeah, let me show. I'm killing us here. I'm going back and forth. This is exactly what you told me not to do. Okay. All right. So yes. Bright spots, red flags, you can kind of choose the type of notable insight that you're looking for. So if you just click bright spots, you'll get the thumbs up, meaning, hey, this is good, congratulations. Yeah. Red flags is obviously where we're going to probably like to dive a little bit deeper, and that is something's trending higher than usual in this example. You can then explore and go deeper into that to find out what's happening.
I love that. That's so cute with the little flag. Nice. Awesome. All right, so then thank you for that. A question from Lucas, then I'll ask my second question. Lucas is asking if Lexio works in languages other than English at this point.
Yeah, at this point, no, it's in English today. Who knows what the future will hold, but no, it's in English. What we find in a lot of our businesses that over the kind of our history, which has predominantly been in the U.S., but we have other products that we've sold international, is that, for most part, kind of analytics and data are kind of consumed within English. I know that's not consistent in every country, but the prioritization right now is English, and hopefully we're successful to some point in the future where we can make Lexio in any language. I don't know if Nate,
Awesome.
if you want to add anything there about how we would do that,
Yeah, we've identified two different ways of doing that. One, in general, the AI is trying to be as language independent as possible. So a lot of the work we do is deciding, what information should be included in the story, what's relevant and interesting to, this particular reader at this particular point of time, what should go in the headline, how should we refer to time frame? Should we say last week or the week beginning, April 7th? There's all those kinds of decisions that the system is making that have nothing to do with language. And then at the very end, it has to convert it to English, or sort of, it's called realization. It realizes that it's English. And so potentially we would have Lexio generate natively in other languages. That's one avenue we've discussed. And also, of course, machine translation is getting really good as we're sort of keep pushing off having Lexio generate in other languages. It's something we've been talking about for, I think, all 11 years I've been here. And along as we keep not doing it, automated translation keeps getting better and better. So that's another option for us is, we continue to be English only generation, but then there's some UI component that lets you just switch to another language. And, under the covers, we're using Google Translate or Bing Translate or Azure Translate or whatever tool is the best. So those are kind of the two avenues we've discussed. But like Cassidy said, everybody's always interested in it. And then we have had a lot of luck sort of keeping it English only for now. And so that's where we're at currently.
Yeah, that makes sense because Google Translate really is pretty accurate for the most part that I've used it. It seems like the narrative that Lexio puts out is in very simple language. So there would be not too much left to the imagination for a Google Translate machine. But I guess
it's interesting because the languages, we shoot for sort of like a middle school grade reading level. We want it to be really, we don't want a bunch of complicated sentence structures and that kind of stuff. We're trying to keep things simple. So that's great for automated translation. And then the tricky bit is a lot of it is kind of businessy jargon for, some customer has some dimension they're talking about that's like, widgets, but some specific form of widgets that Google hasn't seen a lot of. Some of the translation is not as good around those particular kind of business domain objects. So that part of it's harder, but it's a balance.
Yeah, and a LinkedIn user, I'm not sure who this is at this point, but said, well, once you deliver it in Swiss German, you've definitely made it.
Yeah, Swiss German is pretty far down the prioritization list, I'll be honest.
And another comment here from Ron, he says that K-12 really needs data presented this way because too often we just throw a lot of raw data at the teacher and expect them to be able to interpret the data and use it to drive student learning. Now, I just wanted to briefly reflect on this because for the past 2 years, I've been on this monthly school leadership team meeting with at that point, she was in kindergarten, but now first grader. And we do try to use data very unsuccessfully because I see the team, it's like, 12 or 15 of us, half parents, half teachers, and most of them have no clue about the data that's collected. And I can see so many mistakes in terms of how it's aggregated or how they try to explain like chronic absenteeism and all this. I'm like, oh my God, everyone needs to be more data literate. And you can see the problems everywhere. So I agree, Ron, we need this. we need a nice little paragraph that can tell us all the insights without having to dig through data and come up with incorrect assumptions.
Yeah, not to make a plug for one of our customers, but we have a customer who builds K-12 technology called Otis. And they use Lexio internally to their organization, but they use one of our other tools to do exactly what you said, Kate. They have an analytics dashboard, and then they put a narrative next to it to describe to parents and teachers what's happening in the classroom.
Yes, that's good. Or they would have to hire the analysts, right? So I think a lot of times technology ends up being a lot more cost effective and accurate than trying to hire and train up data analysts. my more, I guess, complex question around Lexio is, let's say I'm a company and I have data and I love Lexio. I just saw the Data Gated show and I have all this data. How do I go from having all this data, being excited about the product, to actually seeing something like this? I just want to give you a purpose for keeping your screen sharing. So there you go. So what's the process there?
You want to walk through it first, Nate?
You got it, Cassidy. You can take this.
Yeah. So unlike the way, I'll pull this up so you can look at it. Obviously, we focus on building an experience that's unique to what is in BI today. When it comes to getting data into the system, we didn't create anything unique. It is as easy as getting data into Lexio as it is to get data into Tableau, Power BI, et cetera. So we can connect pretty much any data source. You can also push data to Lexio. In the future, we'll be doing direct query on the data warehouses. So that's on the roadmap and something we'll make sure that we do. So our philosophy here is to reduce the friction it takes to get data into a tool like this. And I would say we do it very consistently to most other analytics tools. And, with that comes the good and the bad. Obviously, you need to have the data structured in a way that you can pass it to any tool. Now, what's different is once the data gets into Lexio, there is no building of a story. It's really just configuration of the story. And so once you have your data and you're getting into Lexio, we can go from kind of data to story quickly. That could be something we could do, depending on your data, in an hour to a couple of days. But there isn't a huge build process on our side with regard to getting this as the output, thanks to the engineering work that Nate and the team have done. So a lot of the work is getting the data ready, just like in any analytic product. But then when you get the data into Lexio, it's just a matter of kind of thresholds and some configuration and tweaking and mapping of the data, which doesn't take very long. We can do that together with the client, and eventually we'll train the client to do that. And you can get stories in a matter of hours to a few days.
And there's one more thing to mention there. There's a lot less upkeep as well. Once it's everything Cassidy just said about getting it up and running, but then like Cassidy showed in Lexio, using those follow-up questions, the what else happened or what to read next, and exploring. And like he said, that's not another dashboard that some analysts had to go build really quickly for you, right? Once the upfront configuration is done and you have the KPIs that matter most to people in your org defined, you have the topics, those different things you can subscribe to. Once those are defined, users have a lot of freedom to explore off of that. And the nice thing is that instead of an analyst sort of building up different dashboards or sorts of chains of dashboards and trying to link them together, it's Lexio that's really kind of laying out the nice garden path for people, and it helps people get to other stories that are relevant to what they're reading, that are impacted or help illuminate what they just read. And so once it's kind of set up, there's a lot more support for data exploration by normal users without the analysts having to do things. But of course, hopefully they don't have to do too much exploration, because the newsfeed, notable insights, and alerts and all that kind of stuff is helping them focus on what matters most to them right then.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of a follow-up question on how long this would take. There's a question of how long would it take to set up the data that Cassidy, you showed in the example. So how long would something like that take?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at this example, if you still see my screen, it's pulling data from a variety of different sources. So you have sales data here that could be coming from Salesforce. You have leads that could be coming from a marketing automation platform. You have human resources data, et cetera, et cetera. So like I said, it doesn't take long once we have the data that we want to connect to get to a point where you're reading a story, and then we can configure the story from there. Really, the work comes down to like any data and analytics tool is, do you have the data in a format and in a place that you can access? Is it clean? Is it ready to go to be looked at in an analytical tool? Do you know, as Nate said, the KPIs that you want to create a story around? So this is very KPI driven story, very metric driven story. You can think of our unit of measure as the metric, not a dashboard. But once you have that, it doesn't not a huge lift to get this up and running, and that's what we do with the client, is work with them to do that. So to get all this set up, depending on how well your data is, could be a week.
Okay. Yeah, I think the data cleanliness will play a role no matter what tool you're trying to use, even if it's just Excel or something that basic.
What we have found at that point, though, is like when you see things in words, it creates a higher bar. So we'll get people really excited, and they'll come in, they'll be like, oh my gosh, like, okay, I have to get my data in order if somebody's going to read it in a tool like this. Which we see that as a good thing, because that means people are using your data. So when people use the data that you have in a company, obviously it's the quality of that data is going to increase versus them not using it. But this is definitely we've seen a bar get set a lot higher when you can see your insight and your data in words and in charts and graphs.
It's funny because lots of times it's data that's been powering dashboards for the last year and a half, and no one ever noticed that it was way off until they see in the story. They're like, that's not what that looked like. And it's like, I don't know, man. You guys have been looking at this for a year and a half, and no one ever, supposedly theoretically looking at this data for a long time. But like Cassidy said, when it's actually, again, when it's in a way that our brains can actually deal with it, all of a sudden there's all these issues that pop out to us that we just sort of glazed over before when it was, just powering a chart somewhere.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to briefly touch on adoption rates again, because for example, if I'm the head of the organization that implemented Lexio, do I have insights to see how many people in the organization are actually reading those stories or have clicked on that specific link?
Yeah, so this is what's nice about this technology is we track everything a user does in the product. So you can see it at a high level. We also track like click path and click stream, et cetera, because what we're doing as we went through the stories, we're also saying, if you look at this, we're going to reorient the story and pull up the next thing that you would look at. So the intelligence in the system is also based on your usage over time and the usage of others who are like you, right? So all marketers like you tend to look at these things. So let's surface those things to the top, for example. That's all powered by figuring out how we'd architect usage underneath.
Okay, great. And we have some more questions that came in. So Torben says, impressive. What kind of stories can it tell? Is it significant changes, highs, lows, comparisons? And a follow-up question, can it also draw conclusions, make predictions to try to find correlations, etc.? So essentially, what kind of stories can it tell?
Yeah, so I'll start with this and then Nate will jump in. We've really focused Lexio on what we call like operational metrics. So let's call those KPIs that change over time. The reason is because this is first and foremost what people use to like drive data-driven decisions is how am I tracking on sales, production, hiring, you have it. And so what Lexio is focused on today, that at a macro level, the type of story is a KPI story that changes over time. That's the focus. Within that, there's a few different story types that you can see in here. If I pull it back up, there's a track story, there's a breakdown story.
We just see your summary pin metrics. That's what you're showing,
yeah,
right? Now I see it. Okay.
Yeah, so if we go into I go back in here, you can see over here, this is a track story. This is the type of we're tracking the KPI. Here, you can go through and compare. So you can compare different drivers of that KPI. You can break down that story. So you can think of this as, you got all your filters here. You can just click on anything here and it'll refire the story and break it down in that dimension. So those are the three kind of macro ways we tell, we have a KPI story. We tell it in three ways. You can track, you can compare, and you can break down. We'll be adding additional story types as we go. I'll turn it over to Nate to kind of elaborate kind of on the vision of where we see this going with regard to that, as well as kind of the predictive side of this, which was the second half of the question.
Yeah. So just like Cassie said, and one of the things that I get excited about with Lexio is that we're always improving these stories. And as soon as we improve them, they improve for our customers. Like the driver analysis we just saw is really nice, and it's a lot better than it was a month ago. And as soon as we made that change internally, obviously all of our stories got better, which we're happy about. But it just gets better for all of the readers throughout all of our customers as well. So it's nice that it's just always improving. When Tableau releases a new version, it's not like every dashboard suddenly becomes more valuable and more insightful. but that's the model we're at with Lexio. And for predictions and correlations, we do project numbers forward. We have different sort of time series analysis and projection libraries we use there. There aren't any correlations in the system currently, I don't think, but that's because we haven't pulled that over. We have, Cassidy referred to, we have a couple other products, sort of earlier things in this space, and there we would look for correlated metrics and call things out. So there's a set of analysis or pieces of analysis that we kind of just haven't got to yet. We're trying to really build out, make sure the stories are valuable, but really build out that whole end-to-end experience and make sure that it's all resonating with people with the news feeds and Slack integrations and all of that kind of good stuff. So in general, we're going to be, continually adding more types of analyses to the story, more forward-looking analysis. But something big for us, and you called this out, Kate, I love that you pointed out the thumbs up and the red flags, is we never want to just dump a bunch of hard stats at people, right? There's a lot of systems today where you can give them something, they'll give you bullet points with, here's all these crazy statistical measures you've never heard of, here's what the value is for this particular line chart. And that's not helpful for the business user, right? And so when we think about correlations, calculating correlations, it's not, we're going to do a whole ton of correlation analysis and dump this all out to somebody. It's like, hey, we noticed when you're reading this particular story about ad spend that there's this other metric that's often correlated with it. And so we're going to call that out in the story and maybe give you a little UI widget to sort of say, hey, this is a good correlation, or this is spurious, or this is causative, or kind of give us a little more information. But it's all around, the analysis we do is never to sort of talk about how hard our analysis is or how fast our computation engine is or any of that kind of stuff. It's hard and it goes fast, but it's all about how we can actually make those stories work for people that aren't statisticians or data scientists or analysts.
I think there's something so powerful in showing your end users maybe some sort of data point that they might have not even thought to look at or to ask about. Because like you mentioned, something that's correlated or shows up often when you're looking at ad spend. I think the ability to pull those insights into their view is already so powerful. And I know we're a little bit over time at this point, and we do have more questions that are coming in, which you guys can actually go on LinkedIn and continue to chat with people in the chat because this will stay on LinkedIn. But I know what everyone is thinking right now. They're thinking, how do I get a trial version, or how do I go and try this out? So where can people go to learn more about Lexio? Is there a free trial available that they can play with?
Yeah, so you can find us at neuroscience.com. That's where you'll find Lexio. We do offer free trials, but it's not something that you can self-serve. So if this is of interest to you and you want to...
That's Cassidy, I got it.
That's me.
You look like he was right behind you.
Nate had a great poker face there. It took a while to figure out that was coming from him. But yeah, if you want to try this with your own data, just hit me up on LinkedIn. We'll get a meeting set up and we'll talk about how we can get you to try it. So it's as simple as that. We do have what you saw here. What I was demoing is an online demo. So you can go at neuroscience.com. You can actually see an interactive demo and you can click around in data. And this, what I demoed here, you can all play with yourself. Okay, awesome.
And Robert's just saying that the baby file. I agree. I think that's exactly what's happening. Nate's back. Oh, here. We'll have to give this baby a free trial now.
He's feeling better now.
Future engineer right there.
Yeah. He's not wearing pants, so we've got to work on something.
Well, we're going to wrap things up. I love this. My last question is usually, where can people go to reach out to you, right? Where do you prefer they reach out? Is it LinkedIn, Twitter? Is there another way to contact you to continue this conversation?
Yeah, I can speak for Nate. Like, you can find us on LinkedIn, both of us. You can also hit me up at cshield@narrativescience.com. As a marketer, I welcome all feedback and all requests to try the product. We'd be happy to get you set up or further conversation on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you both, well, all three of you, so much for taking the time to talk today about data storytelling and culture and adoption rates and data literacy. Always such a pleasure to chat. And yeah, have a great rest of your week. Stay dedicated. I will see you all online.
Thanks, Kate. Really appreciate it. Have a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks everybody
Bye.
for coming. Thanks, everybody.
Aw.